Welcome back to Ghosted, the podcast where, as you know, we talk about all things dating, even relationships, helping you single people listening navigate this crazy world and hopefully make it a little more fun. Today, I'm excited to talk about something that I think a lot of people assume, that you might just know how to date. Maybe people around you assume that you know what you're doing, even though maybe you don't have a ton of dating experience. Or maybe you're assuming that, yeah, people before this have done, before me have done this easily, so it should be easy for me too. But news for you is that, there is no handbook necessarily, but it is important that you learn how to date and how to be in relationships. And that brings me to our guest today, who I want to introduce. Lair Torrent is here. He's an author and speaker who teaches both couples and singles alike how to make love work. Lair, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited to chat with you more. So give people the background. Where did you come from to start working with couples and singles? Give us the history a little bit.
So I was moving through my graduate degree program at Mercy College in New York. And I went to my internship and I told them, I said, I think I want to work with couples. Now, the reason I came to that is I saw my mom was 15 when she had me, and we came from what might best be described as it was abject poverty. And so the relationships I saw around me were ones of practicality. There wasn't a lot of romance. There wasn't a lot of the stuff that we see in movies, poems, and songs being put out there. And at least in the relationships I was seeing with my mom, with my aunts and uncles. And I think that colored the experience I wanted to have around love for myself. And so I spent the better part of my teens and 20s looking for the one. I was the sort of incurable romantic, I think. Yeah. And I wanted to see the things that I was seeing. I wanted to experience the things that I was seeing in the movies and the poems and the songs, but how to do that. And so when I finally became a therapist, I went to my internship and they asked me, what's the population you would like to work with? And I said, I want to work with individuals for sure, people looking for love, but couples as well. And I felt like there was a hole in couples therapy in particular. I felt like based on the experiences that I was having, the tools they were giving us to show people how to love each other better really weren't working very well. And so I went to this very well-known marriage and family therapist. Her name's Dr. Evan Ember Black, and she's been on Oprah. She's written a bunch of books in the genre. And I told her my experience, and she said what everyone else had said to me, which is, welcome to the world of couples therapy. And I said, well, certainly you don't get that answer. I said, you've been on Oprah. She said, I've been on Oprah twice. And she said, well, if you don't like that, then go and figure something out for yourself. And I said, you can do that? And she said, sure. And so I don't think she actually thought I would do it. But I did. Sort of the brash young therapist in me went out there. And so less than put together a book that was solely for couples in particular, I decided to kind of go with the whole sort of group dynamics approach, which is if I can change one part of this group, then perhaps the whole group changes. And so that meant that I was really in my research and in my research for the book and the writing the book, I really wrote the book for individuals who are trying to learn to love better. The backdrop of the book happens to be a lot of couples work because that's what I was doing at the time. And so I included a lot of that information. But, the people who read this book have said to me, they've said, this is a great book for couples, but it's really about you showing up in the best version of yourself to whatever relationship you're trying to create. And so I think that's where it may dovetail into some of your topics.
Oh, totally. And this is your book, The Practice of Love, right?
That's right.
Okay, cool. Just want to make sure in case people are listening and they're like, where can I find this book?
I should have dropped the name of my own book is what you're saying.
Yeah.
I didn't do it. Look at me.
Hey, that's okay. That's what I'm here for. That's why I'm hosting this. I'm here to keep us on track, make sure I ask the right questions. So, how much do you feel like, singles know what they're doing in dating, from your experience versus enter into dating just totally clueless where to begin?
I think singles enter dating from that same place that we enter love, thinking that we should know, as you said at the top of the podcast, you said we come into this thinking we should know how to do it. And one of the taglines within my work and in my book is that relationships and love have fallen into the bin of shit we should just think we know how to do, and we don't. And it's fallen into the bin of things like, filing your taxes, buying a car, getting a mortgage, things that we're supposed to know how to do. No one ever taught us how to do it. And as it turns out, I don't think we really do. And so that's where I came up with 5 very specific practices that I think work when we are either seeking to find love, to be loved, or to love someone else.
Ooh, okay. Can you give us the secret sauce? What are the 5 practices?
I will. Yeah. So, and I'll say them, a few times if people need. So it's mindfulness. It's an Eastern-based approach, right? It's paying attention to your own thoughts and feelings. Why? Because it tunes us into ourselves, so we know a few things. One, what we're thinking and what we're feeling, but also it dovetails into practice too, which is what part of me shows up. What aspect of me, and this is where my daters really tend to thrive. When we start finding out the aspect of me that's showing up to the date, that's really important. Because when I'm sort of coaching people through dating or trying to find their person, I'm like, look, you cannot show up in your wounded child self. You can't show up armored up because you've been stung by the dating world or the apps and the harshness that can sometimes come with that if you're not feeling particularly lucky in that department. So you can't come in armored up. You also can't come in sort of shrunken and sort of like in that less than contracted place. You have to show up in your abundance. You have to show up in the part of you that knows why you are someone that someone would want to spend time with, would want to spend their life with perhaps. And when you come into that relationship holding your own abundance, man, that's a game changer for people who are dating. The third practice is, and what mindfulness also allows us, is to tune into the narrative. And this is one thing that I find with my daters that's often difficult too, is it's what's the narrative that you're telling about. If you're dating men as an example, right? It's like, so there are no good men out there. Oh, okay. That's a story. That's actually just a story.
I hear that every day.
Yes. Yeah. Right. I say, well, look, it's like finding a good parking spot in New York City. You just need one good one.
Exactly.
But the more we steep ourselves in those thoughts that become feelings, that become more thoughts, that become feelings, that become our belief systems, then we sort of concretize in that place. And so we really do have to watch the narrative that we're telling about dating, that we're telling about that person that we're falling in love with, or that person that we're currently loving, because that will predetermine our experience of that person. Now, look, when you're talking about loving another person, they have to actually be doing things that help you create that good narrative. And that's deeper down the road than perhaps we're going to go in just this overview. But then the fourth practice is choosing. And choosing really is about loving ourselves and learning to love another person. Right. So if you're out there and you're dating, it's learning to take care of yourself, learning to draw boundaries, learning to understand where you start, they stop, and really getting in touch with those things. And when you're in a relationship, it's about being able to attune to what it is exactly that makes your partner feel connected and loved. And then the fifth and final practice, and I would say this, if I was drawing those first 4 practices on a board of mindfulness, parts of self, narrative, choosing, draw a big old line underneath that, those 4, and the final practice is personal responsibility, right? Yeah. And this is the one that's not on the front of the website because no one would come. Because most people don't.
You're going to make me own up to my own shit? Oh,
yeah, you get to own your crap. No, but it's also, people say, well, you're asking me to own things I want to own. You're asking me to perhaps be too permissive. No, what I'm saying is that personal responsibility asks us to take the road less traveled. It asks us to own those first 4. And when we start doing that, we really do tap into our own authenticity and our own personal power, no matter what relationship we're either currently in or trying to build.
I mean, I think those 5 things are amazing. And I love that you've put them into a book. And I hope that people listening and watching are paying attention. I'm curious too, do you feel like there's one of the 5 that people you work with tend to struggle with the most?
Mindfulness is tough because it's not It's not difficult. It's just not, how should I put this? It's just hard to remember to do it because our minds go on autopilot so quickly. So that one tends to be one that people wrestle with. But the more we practice it, the better we can get. But more often than not, it's that fifth one. That fifth one, the practice of personal responsibility tends to be like a jagged little pill. Responsibilities seem to share a room in college with shame and blame, I think. And
what a fun room.
Yeah. And so when you start talking like that, they're like, whoa, hold on. And I immediately get pushback. But it's funny, once people see the other side of personal responsibility, like the level of freedom that you can have just standing in that authenticity and that power of, yes, I made that mistake. No, that wasn't my best outing. Or I do need to own the part of me that showed up around that. And the narrative that I've been telling has been one of deficit and contraction. Well, it's from that precipice that we can begin to shift and change. So that's the one they have the hardest time with, but I think that's the one that often facilitates such quick change.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense because it's hard to look back and say, I did mess that up. I'm going to own that. More so we're just like, well, it happened. It's in the past. And
I wouldn't have done
I'll
that
deal with it later. Yeah.
I wouldn't have said that if that's not what I said. Well, that's not how I said it. And truly, very often what I find is people are arguing for their good intentions. Right? And that's a tough one. Because I'm not a person who would ever do that thing that you've said that I've done. There's your friend, partner, person you're dating, and they're obviously hurt by something you did or said or something you didn't do or didn't say. And to own that means at some level, I mean, there's a level of character assassination that's happening within us. That's not who I am. I wouldn't do that to you. How dare you? But triaging the moment says we take responsibility and we're able to say, you know what? That thing I did or didn't do absolutely hurt your feelings, and I could not be more sorry that I handled it that way. There is such a level of freedom on the other side of that. It's incredible. But you have to brave it. It's the Indiana Jones trust walk for those who understand the reference.
I definitely understand that reference. And, in a way, like dating and being in relationships can be a huge personal growth journey as well. Obviously it's important to do your own work and growth before jumping into something, because, you don't want all these things to come up and then you just be totally distraught and not know what to do. And I wanted to go back to one of your 5 that I notice a lot. So as a matchmaker, people usually come to me when they're a bit burnt out on something else in dating apps. And pretty much everyone has a similar narrative. And I've even kind of been assessing this throughout the year where people book a call with me to chat with me about matchmaking. And I say, what's your biggest complaint about dating right now? And it's either that there's no good people out there, I hate the dating apps, or I don't know how to meet anyone good. So it seems like to me, a lot of my people, I have to work with them on their narrative of, hey, there's a lot of people. If dating apps don't serve you, just don't use them. But why do you think it's easier, or I mean, almost sometimes I think people secretly enjoy complaining or almost being in that place of saying, oh, there's no one good out there?
Well, I mean, I think it's an easy explanation.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah, well, it is. It's like, well, it's not me. And I'm not saying it necessarily has to be them. There are no good people out there. It feels like there's this, they're becoming sort of resolute in that understanding. There's just no good people out there. And maybe they're just off-gassing for a moment, because I see this too, as you do, but very often they re-up and go, well, but there's not much you can do with, there's no good people out there, right? There's nowhere really, and that's what I'll say to them. I'm like, so where do we go from there? Now I understand, like, as an example, I'm a man, so I guess I get to say, I don't think men have been doing very well lately, right? We've had a rough go.
Bold accusation. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I think there's a lot of men out there who are, walking around. They're actually boys, not actually being men. And I think that can be tough. But there's no good people out there. That's just not true. Now, look, I can understand maybe the dating pool that you've been experiencing hasn't been particularly good, and this has been your experience for this time. I always have those people pull back. Let's get off the apps for a little bit. Let's take a breath. Let's take up a sport. Let's do something else for a moment, shake it off and come back. And in that time, I'll help them sort of reauthor a new narrative about that experience, which isn't Pollyanna. Like, I'm not going to say, oh, there was no weeds in that garden. Of course there were weeds. There was a not great experience. Yeah. But I always have them fall back on whether you actually, if you want to buy into that and double down on there's no good people out there, how is that ever going to be helpful for you?
Right. I mean, you're not going to meet anyone if you're in that place, or you will meet people, but you probably won't meet the good people, but I think sometimes what I notice too is people struggle between like, wait, my thoughts can actually become my reality, which maybe kind of also goes back to the mindfulness piece of what you were talking about. How could you explain like bridging that gap for people too?
Can you ask that another way?
Yeah, of course. So I feel like, a lot of people will come to me and think, okay, well, if I just say there's lots of people out there, then is everyone going to come to me? I mean, you still have to, do something about it. But how do you explain to people that you can actually bridge that of like your thought process turns into abundance and then you will see results? And
we're kind of moving a little bit into manifestation.
Yeah, a little bit, for sure.
Yeah. So I look, I don't believe we can sit here and go, there's a golden egg in my backyard. There's a golden egg. That's not but I think that'd be so amazing because I wouldn't be writing books or anything. I'd be hanging out in cool places. No. So I do think manifestation is a real thing. And I do think energy does, our thoughts and feelings in particular do become the energy that we put out there. Like energy attracts like energy. And so there you have that. So where do it's not just mindfulness. We have to look at our core wounding in order to understand what we're actually bringing to the table. And so in that regard, I ask 4 questions. All right. And am I loved? Am I safe? Am I enough? And do I matter? And those for me seem to be, am I loved? Am I safe? Am I enough? And do I matter? Those are at the core of the energy we're putting out there. Because if I wasn't safe, right, in my childhood, and the world feels like an unsafe place if I experience trauma, and now I'm going out there and I'm meeting these strange people, and this doesn't feel particularly safe. The world isn't a safe place. That energy, I don't care what outfit you put on, what profile you put up, if you're carrying the energy of the world is a safe place and I'm actually trying to protect myself from the world and the people in it, that will be the experience that you have. Likewise, if I'm not enough, I'm going to come slump-shouldered. I'm going to come sort of hoping that something cool happens, but knowing and at some level, I'm really not enough for anyone to obviously we have a self-esteem issue there, and you're going to imbue everything you do with that energy. If I don't matter or I'm not lovable, all of that's the same. And for me in my work, those are the 4 core elements. When we are born, we're born asking questions. And I know that sounds strange, but if you look at a little baby, they're looking up at you and they're actually asking questions energetically. And they're asking, am I loved? Am I safe? Am I enough? And do I matter? And they go through the formative years of our lives, first asking their families of origin, their extended families, and their communities at large, right? All through the formative years. Am I loved? Am I safe? Am I enough? And do I matter? And if one or more of those questions is not answered in the affirmative, we have a core wounding. We go forth in our lives recreating those relationships. We do it with everyone and everything in our lives. We do it with our friends. We do it with our families. We do it with our significant others. We do it with our work. And so if you're dating out there, you need to ask yourself, was I loved? Am I lovable? Am I enough? Am I safe in the world? Do I matter? And if any of those are not answered in the affirmative, we got some work to do because you are putting that energy out there.
Right. And would a good place be, for people to, reach out for support? Is there stuff that you think people can do kind of on their own if they feel like they're maybe listening to this and answering one of those questions in the negative?
Yeah. I believe in, I think there's a book out there called The Miracle Morning. Someone talked to me about it the other day. For me, I start every day in some sort of solitude and quiet. And I asked myself, who's here? What part of me is here? And how do I feel today? And, one of my core wounds was not enough. I was never enough. When you come from the wrong side of the tracks, you're never really enough. And sometimes you don't matter. And so those are demons those are aspects and parts of me that I have to love and coddle, not coddle, but take care of and recognize when they're up. And so I start every morning I have like 3 or 4 books going always. And I peel through those books and I find little nuggets of profundity that I maybe take with me for the day. And I do my work that way. And then I exercise, and make sure that my jumping off point is in recognition of, some of the wounding that might come out during my day. And I sort of map my day and kind of prepare mindfully to know, what I have to deal with. And I ask myself, if I'm going out and I'm giving a talk and I show up in my not enoughness, right? And I walk out on that stage, how's that going to go? Not great. Yeah. And so I have to invite.
Same thing with audit dates. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And that's what I do with my people. Okay, so who shows up? Who showed up to the date? We always pre and post game. And they're like, Lair, tried so hard. And, at first that part of me that felt so wounded was coming up. And then I found my authentic self and that aspect came to the table and it went great. And so, those are wins. And so, but that's the power. We can change the parts of self that show up to anything we want to do well at, including dating or loving someone, loving ourselves, like we're changing a suit of clothes.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like there might also be some kind of element of almost like practice of, being in that I am enough, or, whatever part you're working on, being in that mindset of you might have to go on a date and mess it up a couple times before you figure out how to be authentic and enough.
Well, and that's what I say to when they come back and they're like, oh my God, it went terribly. I'm like, no, listen, it was just a go. We just tried, and let's go to what we learned. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And that kind of goes back to of like, no one is a professional dater. I mean, maybe there are some people out there who consider themselves that way, even as a matchmaker who all I do is talk dating. And I'm sure we could both say the same, but, there's always something I think we can all learn from the people around us and the people we're bringing into our lives.
Yeah. And I think, when they get out there on that date, why does mindfulness work so well? Because why am I paying attention to my own thoughts and feelings? Because I'm not going to be triggered as quickly by things that can trigger us. I could name a dozen things right now that may trigger somebody, and maybe I'll hit some of them for some of the listeners out there. But it's really good to recognize, like, going to this party with this person, and I don't know anybody, that's triggering. I'm going into my inner wallflower, or this person is intimidating in some way. And so, that's triggering this younger version of myself where I don't feel like I'm enough. Really paying attention to your triggering around dating and the date itself would be really, really important to know what's up for you and to take 5 and take a deep breath and go, okay, who's here and why?
Right. And like paying attention to those things in others that trigger you, and also helping you determine if you want to see that person again.
That's right.
Because I see a lot of people ignoring red flags and things like
it's
that.
Just orange. It's not red, Abby.
Just orange.
It's a burnt
Maybe
orange.
Yellow. Yeah. Sure. Yellow we could deal with,
Yeah,
might be okay with yellow. So I also wanted to ask you a little bit about when people get into relationship. Do you feel like this work in terms of like those 5 key things is just as important when you're dating as when you're in a relationship as well?
I do. I don't think we can ask ourselves, and I don't think we can become self-aware enough. Right. So if we're vetting people to, as I say, for the big job of maybe spending our lives together, it's really important to know what we're bringing to the table. And so, I always say when I work with couples or individuals, the sooner they get to me, the better, because we aren't creating bad habits. And so that goes back as early as like the dating process. So like really working on self-awareness. Being more self-aware helps us in every single area of our lives. The more aware we can become of what's going on for us mentally and emotionally, it gets us out of our knee-jerk responses to things, and we start leading a more mindful life. The brain is cued to go on autopilot and to just react. It wants to sort very, very quickly. We're taking in 400 billion bits of information per second through all our various ports. So the brain wants to automate, and it's a fight to stay out of automation. Automation is akin to knee-jerk or just reacting to things. How do we do it? We just react to things. Not great.
Not great. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's especially true. And, this is how feelings get hurt. This is how we create distance rather than closeness with someone that we want to create closeness with. And so being more aware, being more self-aware of not just our thoughts and feelings, but also how I'm wired, how I'm wounded. Knowing that this person that I'm dating may be going to have a relationship. Look, I always say this. We're sold this bill of goods that relationships are supposed to be puppy dogs and ice cream, and they're not. That's a symptom of something else, right? It's not that.
Yeah.
It's what Harville Hendrix said. He said, we are inexplicably drawn into the arms of a romantic partner who will, by their very nature, recapitulate our childhood wounding. Well, that's where most people stop. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. This is truth, right? And so this person is recapitulating my childhood wounding. Oh my God. But Hendrix, he finished that quote. He said, we do this for a very good reason, so that we can have a reparative experience. And so by this quote, by this understanding, and I think many of us have this experience, that, we do have our stuff pushed on. We need to know what that stuff is. We need to know if I have a hard time feeling like enough in relationships. Historically, I've had enough feeling like I matter, or that I'm lovable, or that I'm safe. Knowing that preemptively is such a big help, because you're like, oh, there you are, little wounded child in me. Of course you're here, right on cue. But now, because I'm self-aware, I don't have to react through you and leave someone with a big question mark over their head like, this was going famously, what happened? By about date 3, that starts happening.
Already, right? And it's like, even I see it sometimes come back to me on, people on date 1, if they're talking about certain topics, that stuff can come up.
Yeah. I don't know what happened.
So if you haven't done some pondering, some work on any of this stuff, maybe this can be your little push in the right direction.
Yeah.
And Lair, I wanted to ask you too, are you dating now? Are you in a relationship?
I am. I'm dating. I'm dating my wife of 21 years.
I love it. So how do you feel like these skills, if you don't mind sharing, have helped you in, meeting your wife, being together? I'm just curious, how in your life that's all applied.
So, it's a 21-year love affair, truly. And I can't, I
wish everyone could say that.
Yeah, no, I'm incredibly lucky, but we've worked incredibly hard in all the right ways. We were the first test subject for The Practice of Love, the book.
I love it.
And so in the book, I'm very, very transparent about where I screwed up and the places where I was not awesome and had to learn, and the places where I found these practices, not just in a book somewhere, but in my life, And so I can tell you that there's not a day that goes by in our lives that these practices aren't being used. It started out by showing up authentically. She always laughs about how authentically I showed up and was very, very clear about who I was and who I wasn't, and that I wasn't going to take I wasn't going to allow for bad behavior because I was going to show. I was raised by women, by the way. I should probably say that. That's definitely wires me a little differently. But anyway, as far as the narrative is concerned, in fights, because we fight, and John Gottman says not if you fight, it's how and how well, and that predetermines how couples will do, and I think that's right. And so when you show up in your warrior self, or in the part of you that's there to protect the wounded child in you, and you're trying to have a connective, loving conversation, how are you doing? Not great. So I still, when my wife and I kind of get into it every so often, she's a therapist too, by the way, so it's all very healthy.
Oh my God, two therapists together?
Yeah, that's good. But I still feel that part of me that comes up, like she'll say or do something that kind of pushes a button in me, and that part will come right up in my ear, and I can hear him. He goes, now you get to say some crazy stuff, right? And I'm like, no, I don't want to say any crazy stuff. I don't want to do that to her. I know where that takes me. I'm not doing that. I've done it before, and I've had to apologize and take responsibility, practice 5, for the things that I've done and said. And so I know that when I get into it with her, I want to make sure that the part of me that's designed to create distance and protect me is stepped aside. She calls him Mitch, and he was a great bartender in New York City. He's good in a bar fight. But I don't have need for that in this modern life, thankfully. He's not a great parent. Yeah, I know he's not a great parent, and he's not a great partner. He's a knuckle dragger, this part of myself, and I don't have need for him with her. And so that I make that part of me step outside, and I come to her, I think in my better moments, with authenticity and that authentic, wise self. Now, as far as the narrative is concerned, I think the narrative helps us with sex across the lifespan, right? If we sat here and we thought about food, even though perhaps we've just eaten, if we thought about our favorite food long enough, sooner or later, our stomachs would actually growl. Because the brain tells a story, as Eckhart Tolle said, the brain tells a story that the body believes. And I think no truer words are ever spoken, right? And if we sit here and we think about sex long enough, pretty soon our bodies will go, yeah, let's go do that. Now, most people, through familiarity, will tell themselves stories about their partners sexually, like been there, done that, and it's mundane. But what if we were to reauthor a new story about our partners and their bodies? And I tell a story in the book about this old couple that I meet on a train, and how they sort of taught me how the narrative can keep passion alive. The story that you tell about your partner. Is this the partner that I've been with her 21 years, seen all that I can see, or is this the ever-evolving puzzle that I get to solve on a daily basis that's forever interesting to me? Because she's a human being, and we're all human beings, and humans are friggin' interesting if you give them a chance to be. But you're pretty sure you know that person. Sometimes. What's that? Yeah, but you're pretty sure you know that person, and you've got all the answers, and you're not curious anymore, right? So, and then choosing is the fourth practice, and it's really knowing that my wife has deep-seated childhood trauma. Knowing how to love her is she never felt safe in the world. And so I may meet the protector part in her, but there's a little girl standing behind that woman that just wants to know she's safe. And as long as I keep that in my mind's eye, I'm not talking to her protector. I'm talking to her wounded child. And I can have immense compassion for that.
So important to have those conversations of like, where do you
feel
like you're lacking? Yeah. Hey, you totally could. You know what? Maybe we'll just have to, part 2 it and have you back at some point too.
Don't invite me to a good time because I'll be there.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you're having a good time. I hope people listening are having a good time too. And Lair, I want to make sure we save some time now for you to plug what you're up to, where people can grab your book, where they can follow you. If they want to reach out, can they? Give us all the info.
So I do lots of little reels and talking heads on Instagram at Lair Torrent Holistic Therapist. You can find my book, The Practice of Love, Break Old Patterns, Rebuild Trust, and Create a Connection That Lasts on Amazon or wherever finer books are sold. And I have a podcast of my own, 2 podcasts of my own, one called Not Your Mama's Therapy, and I will give a warning. It is we try to bring a lot of humor and also some really good therapeutic nuggets throughout, but it's pretty off-brand and sometimes a little bawdy and dirty, but that's fun. And then I do a podcast with my wife Ashley called The Practice of Love, and we have our first episode that just came out.
Exciting. And where can people listen to those podcasts?
On Apple Podcasts and wherever podcasts are.
Okay. Perfect. Well, after you listen to this episode, go check those out.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Lair, I also like to end these with a little extra piece of advice, words of wisdom, maybe something that we haven't gotten to touch on yet. is there anything else you would like to give our listeners before you leave?
Yeah, I think probably the way we started the episode, I love to kind of tie things up like that, right? Which is that remember that whether you're loving another person or you're loving yourself, if we want to be good at anything, we practice at that. We practice the fundamentals. And so if that's a good backhand in tennis or learning Italian, we have to practice that thing. And love should not have fallen into that bin of things we should just know how to do, because we don't. And so don't be afraid to kind of ask those questions of like, how could I be loving not only this person, but myself better in the situation? If you do that, then very rarely will you be too far afoot.
Thank you. Well said. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've enjoyed having you on.
Yeah, it's been great.
Short and sweet, but I think we packed so much in here.
I hope so.
Hopefully we'll get to do a part 2, and I can't wait to listen to your podcast.
Right on.